Well, okay, today we're in Galatians chapter 1, beginning in verse number 13. And uh, for those of you who've been in the church for a great number of years, have some understanding about the Apostle Paul. And some didn't back in those days. And so Paul alludes to this in Galatians chapter 1, down in verse number 13, where he says, "You have heard of my conversation." If you're reading the King James, that word conversation just simply means his manner of life. They knew something about Paul and who he used to be. Now, just in case you don't know this, Paul was known by his Jewish name, Saul, and he was called oftentimes Saul of Tarsus. Uh, at his conversion and following years, he's just known as the Apostle Paul. So we don't want to be confused on that, do we? All right, so Paul says this: "Ye have heard of my former manner of life in the past in the Jewish religion, how beyond measure," that little phrase just means over the top, excessive. I mean, Paul was a fanatic, and what it was, he persecuted the church of God. I mean, it was Paul's intent to completely wipe out the church. I mean, if you read Acts 8:1 and then go further into Acts chapter 9, Paul's intent was to destroy the church. And so Paul is talking about something that he was committed in doing. Now, watch what he says here in verse number 14. "And he had advanced," that's the word profited, "in the Jewish religion above his equals," that is, of the folks of his own age. And, he was climbing up the clergy ladder. He was on his way to the top. I mean, here's a fella whose life, his vocation, his calling was in the Jewish religion. I mean, I want you to understand something here. Paul was committed to it. He was convicted to it. And not just academically, it wasn't just something that he adhered to or believed, but I mean, he was in all the way into the Jewish religion and the ancestry of his father's religion. I want you to understand something. Paul was all the way in this thing. So, but something happened to change him, and then the things that he was so convicted of and committed to, he now is preaching against them. So, what's the point? The point simply is this: you know how I used to live. You know my former way of life. You know how much I was entrenched in it, how much I gave my whole life to it. And the point now is the very things that I was for, now I am against. And Paul's dealing with this in the book of Galatians. And what his concern is that the Judaizers, these are false teachers, that have come in and corrupted the gospel. And if you remember, in changing the gospel by adding the elements of Judaism into it, he says you just changed the very nature of it. And so Paul is dealing with that kind of stuff. And we need to think about some things, don't we? When a person is putting stuff in there that's not supposed to be in there, we better think about that. And Paul is saying, you know how committed I was. I'm a person who is committed. Here, I'm a person who is convicted. And when he saw the truth and he was convicted of God's gospel, now he's against the stuff he used to believe in. Boy, sometimes it's hard to change, isn't it? And some people resist change, and some people are unwilling to change. And then there's some real problems there. Because when you start really not believing what you're doing, you know what the Bible calls that? Hypocrites. Because you're pretending to believe something and doing something that you really are not convicted of. Paul was convicted of the gospel. I don't think there was probably, if any or few, that was as convicted and devoted to the gospel of Christ as the Apostle Paul. So we're going to be looking at this in the book of Galatians, tremendous book, and it'll give us a grip on a whole lot of things, about the gospel. Hope you'll stay with us. See you tomorrow.